I mean, context dependent. So some things that might govern that. Um, the importance of the block. Like I know that if we just, hey, whatever, let's send it. That's probably going to kill the block. Um, I find that it's rare that we'll just send it in this workout and then we'll come back, even the next week and just keep progressing like we would have expected to. Nah, it's probably going to be the end. So if we have time to kill this block and still reorient and be on pace for whatever competition we're training for, then yeah, that'd be fine. Um, and maybe even beneficial, because how often do you get to go for it, and that's another thing that is kind of part of Bondarchuk's original philosophy in this is that, if you think about kind of a traditional planning approach, how many sessions does the athlete do when they're training in a real peak condition, when they're really at their best? It's like everything is leading up to that, but then you only get a very short amount of time there. So one of his original ideas is that if you have this single stimulus, and for him it was one training session that repeats, you're going to get a lot more peaks per year, and that you'll get a lot more exposure to training in that peak condition. So if you think about it that way, if you assume that training in a peak condition is valuable, then hey, if you're having one of those days and and you can afford it, then yeah, I mean, that would be cool, but it will have some costs, and can you pay those costs?
It sounds like
How do you,
go ahead, John.
so when people hear that, the one thing they kind of red flag in their head, or they get an exclamation point, is fatigue. What are your current thoughts on fatigue and its impact, especially when we start talking about that kind of training?
Man, so fatigue is kind of a mystery to me right now. I think that especially in like the evidence-based powerlifting, bodybuilding communities, we've kind of relegated fatigue to this unwanted byproduct status. It's not important. It's not, fatigue is related to muscle damage. Muscle damage isn't useful for hypertrophy. It's not useful for strength. It's disruptive to technique. So like, yeah, it's this unwanted byproduct of training. And I don't know what it is. It feels like something is missing. It feels like, yeah, I see how we got there, and I see like how our thinking kind of arrives at that conclusion, but it just feels like we're missing the forest for the trees, that there's something essential that fatigue can be telling us that's outside of its physiological, like it doesn't have to be directly stimulating of muscle hypertrophy, for example, for it to be useful in some capacity.
Well, you mentioned the example of taking advantage of the opportunity, pushing the red line a little bit, and just signing off on the fact that there's probably going to be a little cost to that.
Yeah.
Are you defining that cost as fatigue?
I don't know. I mean, it's tough to differentiate, right? So if I say, okay, we're in session 4 and you're having a great session, so we just go for it. Session 5, the performance is worse. Is the performance worse because of fatigue or something else? Because there's a lot of other, I mean, it's really difficult, I think, to nail down a definition of fatigue. And I don't think the definition of fatigue is that closely related to performance. Because I've had athletes who are absolutely fatigued. They feel wrecked, near the point of injury, but are still performing well. It's not, they're just not that tightly related. There's other things that are affecting performance other than fatigue. Fatigue definitely does affect performance at some point, but that's a lot more of a fuzzy relationship than I think than I think we wish it was, you know?
Well, we can look back a little earlier in the conversation and start talking about fatigue's relation to their expectations. If they've had a crappy training cycle where they're tired before and they didn't have a great day, how much do they come in and go, well, I'm tired again, this is going to suck.
Right.
And some people just, they don't think that way. They're tired and they're like, I'm still going to get after this. I got to do what I got to do. And they just PR everything in that state. So I'm with you. I don't know if it's as great of an indicator for performance as we claim it to be.
Yeah. And I mean, I've seen it go the other way as well. Like, you've got whatever training intervention, and, you keep going until there's a performance degrade. Whether there's volume manipulations or not, you keep going until there's a performance degrade, and we say, oh, that's fatigue. That indicates something about your level of fatigue tolerance or something like that. Like, well, how do we know that? Like, if we're saying fatigue equals performance, like, that doesn't seem right,
It's got to be a proxy for something else, but it's hard with the psychological component as well, because for some athletes, if they feel a certain way, that lends itself to, like what Jared said earlier, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. I feel tired, I'm probably going to have a shitty workout. Whereas other athletes don't necessarily, and maybe it's because they're experienced and they know patterns and they know not to necessarily listen to something right off the bat, or maybe it's just athletes who don't care and they feel a certain way, but they're still going to go into the gym and do their normal thing. And if the day shapes up to be fantastic, that's awesome, and that happens a lot. It's hard to know when we're talking about fatigue how the psyche responds to the feeling, and how willing you are to touch it a little bit, to keep touching it, because sometimes just starting your warm-ups is not good enough either. That still feels like shit. But there's like that thing that just clicks, and all of a sudden you're at your top sets, and it turns out to be a really good day. Those are the things that you just can't explain. Now, the rebuttal to that would be, but you're constantly pushing the red line. Your body was telling you something for a reason. Maybe you can always supersede that if you wanted to, but what's the accumulative cost of doing that on a consistent basis where you're not thinking long term, you're just thinking session to session? That's the rebuttal. I don't steer that way generally. My thought is get the most out of every single session as you possibly can, and if things accumulate to the point where you can't manipulate yourself out of it, then it's pivot block time. Right. But to me, that's just hard training.
I agree. I think you have to win the training sessions, right? Like you can't expect the block to just magically be great if you're not winning training sessions along the way. And sometimes that means, hey, suck it up. You've got to figure this out. And there's value in that. Should you do it every time? Probably not. There's some limit there, but the limit isn't, oh, never do that. You shouldn't go too far the other way either. I think just the fact that you show yourself. Like, so I had a happy example of this on Thursday this week. So I'm doing these front squats.
Brutal.
So I'm doing these front squats, and I've got in my head that it's like a high box front squat. I do weird stuff in my training these days, but I'm doing sets of 10, and I got it in my head that I want to try this 405 front squat for a set of 10 off this box. And I've been working up to that. Last week, I was working up to it, and it is one of those sessions that you were talking about, Quinn. Like, it looked like it was there, but I was like, the prudent decision is to go 395, not 405. And so that's what I did, and I crushed it. 405 definitely would have been there, and I thought, well, that's fine. I played the smart game, and I, held the line. I waited, I'll wait for a week. And so this week I come in, and everything felt like garbage. Like I had my 2 work sets before the top set. Like, they were terrible. And in fact, the second one, which was 385, was like a max effort. I had zero justification for adding 20 pounds and expecting this to go well. But I was like, well, you know what? I don't want to wait another week. We're going to try it. The worst that happens is I miss it, So I tried it and I got it. And I got it at the target RPE and everything. So some weeks you just got to say, screw it. We're going for it, and I'll see if I can show myself something.
Just want to say that my coach has front squats in my program right now, so every week that the knurling of my power bar is digging into my clavicles, I just think that Mike T is doing 405 for sets of 10 now. So I got to step it up.
There you go.
That example speaks, I think, highly to the psychological side of things. Whereas you had it in your head, whether you're thinking about it overtly or not throughout the week, last week you knew you were going to go for 405. You've known that up until this week.
Yeah.
And it's like those those warm-up weights, you didn't care about those.
Right.
It was like you probably could have put 405 on the bar, let's just get it over with.
Yeah.